Отже, сьогодні в нас подія,
we
яка
are here
називається
today
«Активи
at an event that
інтереси
is called
українських
Assets and
олігархів».
Interests of
Це
Ukrainian oligarchs.
проект, над яким
This is a
Центр
project
економічної
that the Center
стратегії
for Economic
працював
Strategy has been working on
протягом
for
останнього року. Ми
the
почали
last
працювати
year.
ще
We have
до
started
початку
working on this
війни
project
над
prior to
цим
the
дослідженням.
full-scale aggression.
Ми виконували його за підтримки
We had conducted this study
Центру міжнародного
supported by
приватного
the Center for
підприємництва
International
SAIP.
Private Enterprise
Це
SAIP.
американська
It is
організація,
an American organization
яка надавала фінансування цьому
that was
проекту,
funding this project,
фактично урядовими коштами Сполучених Штатів
in
Америки
fact,
через
using the
National
funds
Endowment for Democracy.
from the US state through the
Зараз
National
перед
Endowment for
тим,
Democracy.
як ми зробимо презентацію, далі
And
запросимо
prior
до
to
обговорення
presenting our
наших гостей,
research and inviting our guests
я б
to
хотів дати
discussion,
слово
I would like
Еріку
to give the
Концу,
floor to
який
Eric
є
Konz,
нашим
who
давнім
is
партнером в САЙПі, Міжнародному
long-standing
центрі
partner
приватного
of ours
підприємництва.
at
Він є
SAIP.
заступником
He is
регіонального
the
директора у Європі
Deputy
та
Regional
Євразії,
Director
дуже
in
багато
Europe and
років працює в
Eurasia.
Україні.
He's been working in Ukraine for quite a few years.
Are you
Eric,
here?
the floor is yours.
So, Eric, floor is yours.
All right. Yeah, thank you. I heard your intro, and it's true. We discussed this project before the war began, and it's good to continue to work. Obviously, the objectives of the project have changed, but I just wanted to kind of kick us off this morning. First of all, thanking Lib and team at Center for Economic Strategy, who have been excellent partners to SAIP and have really led in thinking about what type of Ukraine economically should come out of the war. It will be a very different place. And I just want to congratulate CES on their forward-thinking efforts to shape what the country can be after the war is won. But in remarks to this specific proposal or this specific project, to me, it really shows what makes Ukraine a wonderful place. What are you fighting for? You're fighting for the freedom to question. You're fighting for the freedom to criticize, to suggest alternative directions. You're fighting for what you're doing today in gathering in a room, discussing what would be in other countries a politically sensitive topic. And you're having a constructive dialogue with different partners around this issue. This is really what you're fighting for. You're fighting the dream. Dream of a better Ukraine, dream of a Ukraine that's more equal, that's more progressive, and that's able to deliver more prosperity and greater opportunity to more Ukrainians. Look, I've worked in Ukraine for a long time, and this project is, I hope, what Ukraine is fighting for. It's to make a new economy, a new place where more Ukrainians have more opportunity to thrive and to prosper.
Отже, трошки про цей проект.
So, to tell you more about this
Це
project,
насправді, я не буду розповідати про сам зміст, про
I'm not
результати
gonna
дослідження
elaborate
розкаже
more
Діма
about
Горюнов,
the
наш
essence of the
старший
project
економіст.
because
Але трохи
Dima
про
Горюнов will
логіку,
tell
чому
you
ми цим
more.
зайнялись
But a little
насправді.
bit about the logic why we started
В наших
working on this
партнерів
project.
в САЙПу є така
Our
багаторічна
partners,
програма, за
SAIP,
якою
they
ми з
have a
ними
long-standing
співпрацюємо,
program
вона
in
називається
which we've been
Corrosive
cooperating
Capital.
with them. It's called
Тобто
Corrosive
вони
Capital Program.
досліджують
So
в різних
basically,
країнах,
within this
як
program, SAIP
впливає такий
studies
от корозійний
how the
капітал.
corrosive capital influences the
Насамперед
economy in different
йдеться
countries.
про
And here we're primarily
те, що
talking
англійською мовою
about
називається malign actors, тобто тих,
the
хто
malign
хоче
actors.
впливати
So
задля
basically
якихось
the actors
негативних
who are
цілей на
using their
рівні
assets
країн. Тобто
to
ми
impact the
працювали, ми
state
робили
in a
таке
negative
дослідження.
way.
Ви можете
So that
знайти на
was
нашому сайті
the
по
research that we made.
російському
You can find it
корозійному
on our
капіталу, по
website. We
китайському
were
корозійному
studying Russian
капіталу.
corrosive
І от,
capital,
власне,
Chinese
минулого
corrosive
року ми
capital.
запропонували нашим
And last year
партнерам
we
попрацювати з
suggested to
таким третім корозійним капіталом. Це, власне, внутрішньоукраїнський корозійний капітал, капітал олігархів. Ну, хто це такі, як ми їх визначали, як воно співвідноситься з тим, що робить держава в цій сфері, детальніше вже розповість Діма. Але такий один висновок, про який я зараз скажу, це те, що, власне, коли ми обговорювали вже результати, з'ясувалося, що, власне, наш рідний корозійний капітал є найкорозійнішим з тих трьох, які ми досліджували. Тобто ані росіяни не мали настільки великого впливу на економіку в той момент, коли ми це робили, це вже було, звісно, після 2014-2015 років. Ні китайці, де ми навіть так трохи з образою на них подивилися, що таке враження, що для України що для Китаю Україна не була цікавою, тому що на відміну від багатьох інших країн, де робилися аналогічні дослідження нашими партнерами за таким цим за глобальною цією мережею проєктів по корозійним капіталам, наприклад, Балкани. Тобто на Балканах досить великий був визначений вплив китайського капіталу і, звісно, російського так само. Власне, наприкінці минулого року прийшла черга українських олігархів. Ми хотіли, звісно, зробити це дослідження ще до... Коли у нас травень був місяць, коли мав бути список реєстру олігархів.
We wanted to publish the oligarch census
тобто ми
in
хотіли
May.
це зробити до травня, звісно,
We were
через
planning
війну все
to
відклалося і
conduct
сам,
this research prior
власне,
to May, but due to
процес
the
на
war,
стороні
it has
держави
been
теж затягнувся,
postponed,
але
and the
врешті-решт, коли ми
process
це
has
зробили, ми
been
вирішили це
complicated by all these
представити.
circumstances. So
Власне,
when
я
we
передаю
finalized this
слово
research,
Дмитру
we
Горінову,
decided to
старшому
present it. So I'd
економісту,
like to give the floor to Dmytro Gorinov, our senior economist,
починаючи від роботи з багатьма важкими реєстрами
has
даних
been working on
до
many complex
перекапування історії
databases and been
акумулювання
looking through many
багатства українськими
backstory
олігархами і до
cover-ups
рекомендацій,
of
що
Ukrainian oligarchs
з тим
and
впливом,
trying to shape
якого вони набули за
recommendations
роки
on
незалежності України
what
робити,
can we
власне,
do with
працював
the influence
багато
the
місяців з цим
oligarchs has
проектом. Діма, прошу.
acquired over the course of Ukrainian independence. Can you hear me?
Хочу ще додати, що, власне, якщо ти пам'ятаєш, один з висновків по тим попереднім
I
капіталам
remember
було,
that
що, власне,
one
місцевий
of the
капітал їх
conclusions from
він
the
такий
other
настільки потужний,
capitals
що, власне, інші
was
вже
that
тут місця не
the impact of
залишилось.
the local curves of capital was so
Власне,
significant that
почнемо
there
з
was no place
визначення.
for others, right?
Хто такі,
So
власне,
let's
олігархи?
start
До
with
цього
the
ми оперували
definition.
цим
Who are
поняттям досить
oligarchs? Prior, we've been using this term
розмито, тому що це
very
було
deliberately,
таке
very
побутове
vaguely,
слово,
because it
в
was
якому
such
не
a
було чітко
household
визначено, то
name,
ми
right?
розуміли, що це якісь
Without
багаті
a
люди,
clear
які були
definition. We
різними
understood that those were rich
великими,
people
переважно
who
активами
possess significant assets
або цілими, можна сказати, галузями економіки, при
or
цьому які
even
мають
certain
політичний і
industries
медійний вплив і
and have political
використовують цей
and
вплив, щоб
media
якось,
influence and use this
скажімо
influence
так, підсилювати свій бізнес.
to strengthen and
Минулого
reinforce their
року
businesses.
здається,
Last
в
year,
листопаді якраз.
I believe in November, so it was
який,
exactly a
власне,
year
визначив
ago,
це поняття.
Ukraine adopted a law that
Він
defined
містить
this
4
notion.
головних критерії,
It contains
і
four
до яких
main
треба
components.
дотриматися мінімум 3 або 4 з них, щоб отримати такий
And
статус і
a person has
потрапити
to
в відповідний
satisfy 3 out of 4
реєстр.
components
Це
at
розмір
least
бізнесу,
to get into
це
the registry.
наявність
That's the size of
в
the
цьому
business,
бізнесі монополій,
monopoly within that
включно з
business.
природніми монополіями. Це
And we're talking about natural
участь в
monopolies as
політичному
well.
житті держави
That's participation of an individual in the political life
мати
of the
вплив
state
на медіа.
and
Тобто, в
influence
принципі,
over media.
приблизно ті ж критерії, які
So these
всі
are
розуміли
approximately
без
the
закону,
same
просто тут
criteria
це
that
було
people were
більш
understanding,
чітко
that people were
визначено в таких формулюваннях, що
looking
це
at without
якось,
the law, but this is a more clear
дозволяло б,
definition
не дозволяло б маніпулювати критеріями і
that allows us to
якось
avoid
штучно
manipulation
спробувати уникнути цього
and
статусу.
allows us
Але
to clearly
закон трошки
define
пізніше.
who oligarchs
От
are.
ми у нас
But
була
we're going to
дискусія
talk about
такого
the law a bit
юридичного сенсу, що чи
So
можемо
the
назвати
discussion
олігархами
turned
когось
towards the
до того, як,
legal
власне, існує
element.
реєстр. Ми
Can we call
вирішили,
somebody an
мабуть,
oligarch
можемо, але
prior to the
просто з
existence of the
поправкою теж
registry?
в тому
Well, we
сенсі,
decided we
що
can,
це люди,
but
які
considering that
відповідали
these are the
би
individual
цим критеріям
who would
раніше,
fit
якби
this
такий закон
criteria
вже діяв, і при цьому вони
before,
б не намагались
if the law was adopted prior,
цих критеріїв позбутись.
and
Тобто
if
така
those people
досить довга
did
конструкція,
not
оскільки ми
try
її не будемо
to
повторювати
avoid this
повністю, то ми
definition.
умовно це в
Right, so
цьому
this is a
сенсі
legal
ми
construct.
називаємо якихось
These are the
підприємців
people we
олігархами.
would call
Отже,
oligarchs.
Оскільки ми не могли вивчати прям всіх, тому що це
we were
фізично
unable to
неможливо,
study
у нас такі
everyone because
були
it's
обмежені
physically
ресурси, там
impossible.
часові,
We did
людські
have
і
limited resources in terms of time,
тому ми взяли просто,
workforce,
оскільки
and
ми
money.
взяли найпростіший
So
критерій, тобто
we
найперший,
took
власне,
the
розмір
most
бізнесу,
simple
який це
criterion, the
плавно, це
net
рейтинг
worth, and we
Фокуса
sorted
за
the
21 рік,
oligarchs. This is the rating
люди.
of a publication called Focus, the
Ми
richest people
відібрали з
of
них
Ukraine.
10 за критерієм,
We
щоб вони,
selected 10
оскільки, щоб
out of them.
уникнути волатильності
To avoid the
протягом різних
volatility
років, ми
throughout the
взяли
years,
людей.
we had selected
Ми
individuals
взяли людей, які були в десятці в середньому
that
за останні 5
were
років. Тут, власне, ви можете
on
побачити
average
волатильність
within the top
позиції
10
олігархів,
richest
яка
people in Ukraine. You can see the volatility of the oligarchs' positions, which is why we sort of try to use an average over the course of a couple of years,
в звіті ви побачите
because
дуже
the
великий розділ
report
присвячений бізнесу у
has
конкретних
a
людей
significant
і їх
chapter that's dedicated to business of specific individuals and their interest in the regulation of their respective industries. And so here we can make a conclusion
якось, не знаю, завжди були. Ну, це не так.
that we're used to the fact that
Вони
oligarchs
з'явились,
existed
деякі
all the time, but that's
стали
not
бути
true.
олігархами. Тобто,
Some people became oligarchs, some people stopped being oligarchs because they're quite closely tied to their assets. So if those people are losing these assets, right? For example, if they were destroyed in the war, nationalized, this person stops being an oligarch. So it's not like a belief system or something. So
перебрали дані про десь, не знаю, 750 мінімум компаній. Ми вивчили їх фінансову звітність, як там вони були створені або приватизовані, як вони себе вели. Тобто ми, в принципі, дуже багато цифр обробили. Це, я вважаю, основний графік цього дослідження на основі цих 750 фінансових звітів. Це частка олігархів в економіці взагалі разом.
This is the percentage of oligarchs in the economy overall.
Цієї цифри були використані не трошки більше груп, тобто тут 20 фінансово-промислових груп найбільших України. В цих графіках це є. Тобто, умовно кажучи, якщо додати ще якісь дрібніші, які ми просто не встигли порахувати, то було не дуже сильно більше. Тому, як ми бачимо,
significantly.
So
as you can see, the percentage of oligarch businesses in the overall revenue, in their overall assets, and in the overall employee numbers in Ukrainian economy has been decreasing. Depending on what you look at, there was a peak in 2011, and then it has been decreasing. And it's not only related to the occupation of Ukrainian territories on the east. We try to model this graph, even taking into consideration the lost assets, but the percentage of oligarchs was still decreasing, which means that the rest of the economy is growing faster.
Умовно кажучи, маємо таку певну природню деолігархізацію.
So here we have this natural phenomena of the number of oligarchs decreasing. But it shouldn't placate us because the number of the oligarch businesses within the economy is still very significant, in particular within certain industries, which I believe you're familiar with. But in different industries related to mining, natural monopolies such as gas distribution, electricity distribution, aviation, television, you name it.
Викладемо звіт на днях, почитаєте детальніше.
We're going to publish the report and you'll be able to read it in more detail, but
це цифри станом на 20 рік.
These are the numbers for 2020.
Зараз маємо робити поправку на те,
Of
що
course, we have to take into consideration that certain assets no longer exist or they no longer belong to oligarchs today.
Ще дуже спостерігалась дуже така чітка географічна структура. Тобто
another thing that you could actually notice was the clear geographic structure. So it was something very significant that individuals prefer to monopolize the business in the region where they personally come from. So you can see the percentage of regions in the income of oligarchs and the percentage of oligarch income within the entire income of a region. And you can see that some of these indicators are quite significant.
Ой, я перепрошую, щось не оновилося нюанси роботи онлайн. Це частка
There were some technical difficulties, but I'm going to explain again. So this is the percentage of oligarch income in the entire income of a region. So
виручка 20 найбільших фінансово-промислових груп у виручці
the income of 20 largest financial industry groups, the percentage of that income within the income of a region. This is the data for 2020 because we don't really have complete data for 2021, and 2022 the situation has drastically changed, which is something we'll talk about a little bit more later. And you're basing this data on the registration of a company? Yes. Yes, we are basing it on a registration location. So how did the people receive these assets? Because for a while, it was state property, right? And all of these assets belong to the state. Oligarchs obtained them through the privatization process.
І це було, ви, мабуть, пам'ятаєте найбільш
гучні
скандали, як Кривий Рішталь.
Тобто
не завжди ці умови були чесними і передбачали якусь повну конкуренцію, включно з іноземними гравцями, які бажали би купити українські заводи, фабрики. І, відповідно, це і впливало на ціни, за яким людям вдавалося придбати ці активи. Бачите графік зверху, який говорить про надходження інфляції. Оцей пік у 2005 році – це Кривий Рішталь. Всі інші надходження трошки більше, ніж одна Кривий Рішталь. Всі
put together are a little bit more than one purchase of Kривий Рішталь. So over the entire history of independent Ukraine, the income from privatization was a little bit over $6 billion.
Чистий прибуток одного холдингу з минулого року.
The net income of one holding for 1 year, just for you to compare.
Після того, як, власне, ці активи вже потрапили до
далі, have been obtained by oligarchs.
Ці групи через різні інструменти впливу на політику, на медіа, вони вже добувалися якихось різних преференційних умов для свого бізнесу, щоб з одного боку заробляти більше, через зловживаючи монопольним становищем, маючи доступ до недержавних закупівель з якимись неринковими цінами, а навіть просто отримуючи певні бюджетні дотації. Природних монополій – це таке трошки якесь штучне формування тарифів на послуги цих монополій, відповідно, яке дозволяло заробляти їм більше, ніж це вимога. Ніж можна було ці моделі були інакше. З іншого боку, було різне регулювання, яке дозволяло їм витрачати менше. Найбільш яскравий приклад – це добування, тому що до недавнього часу, та й, в принципі, зараз теж, ставки на, по суті, все, крім вуглеводнів, вони на якісь копійчання. Тобто це дуже низькі суми, які дозволяють відповідно цим підприємствам які вони отримують офіційно, бачать значні податки великі, все окей, да? Але ми бачимо, що вони отримують ресурс, який, по суті, Конституція належить народу України. Тобто орендна плата, я нагадую просто, орендна плата – це не податок. Це ціна,
it's not really even a tax. It is just the price that a private user of a resource pays to the owner, the people of Ukraine, represented by the state budget.
Сплачує на, я би сказав, не зовсім справедливу ціну.
And I believe it isn't really fair.
Цей розділ насправді в тексті займає половину.
This chapter constitutes half of the entire research. So the report is quite extensive.
Я сподіваюся, ми завтра його викладемо.
I believe we'll be able to publish it tomorrow. I'm sorry for not being able to publishing it prior to the event, but we did have some technical difficulties.
Звіт великий, десь близько 100 сторінок.
So the report is quite large, it's approximately 100 pages, but half of the pages are occupied by this chapter, where we describe the businesses of the oligarchs and their regulatory interests. I'm not going to elaborate more, because there are other topics I would also like to cover.
Будь ласка, наступний слайд.
Next slide, please.
Отже, інструмент впливу.
Instruments
згідно
of
з критеріями
influence.
закону, їх два.
According to the criterions defined by the law, those are two instruments of power.
Всі олігархи, вони є бізнесмени, тобто вони не народилися з політики переважно. Тобто вони вже до неї приєдналися в різних форматах, підтримуючи політичні партії, фінансуючи політичні компанії, досить часто і беручи особисту участь.
Individually running for office. You can see the participation in politics of oligarchs. We can see that everybody except for Firtash and Boголюбов have been represented in the government, primarily in the executive government. They ran for office in the party list. Some of them were represented in the government for a while. Some, but those two, Firtash and Boголюбов, did not run for office personally. They just supported political parties. Oligarchs usually push their business agenda through their media. And we're primarily talking about TV channels or the monopolized interest, because we can see the losses of the corporate entities across the years. We can see that TV channels owned by oligarchs aren't profitable, which tells us this is not necessarily true. It wasn't business in the classical term, except for SCTV and STB owned by Viktor Pinchuk,
Мінус 30 мільйонів збитків
because those were profitable. So if we're talking about 30 million losses, are we talking about 30 million profit? Right. So when you look at these numbers, you have to think reverse. If somebody has lost 30, they have gained 30 elsewhere.
Це дозволило це дозволило вивести свої канали в топ глядацьких симпатій на 5 телеканалів 4 власників припадало десь 60% рейтингу. Це до того, як перейшли на єдине марафон, до воєнний час. Власне, зараз ці рейтинги ніхто і не рахує з цих причин.
And now nobody really calculates these viewership ratings. But here, just to compare, we provided you the data for the viewership rating for the state-owned TV channel, and we can see that it's not very popular.
Будь ласка, наступний. Це найцікавіше.
And this is the most interesting part.
Колеги з детектор медіа
порахували і робили
це регулярно протягом певного часу. Які вони просто колосально робили роботу. Я просто бачив первинну базу, вона просто величезна. Вони аналізували новину, кожну новину розбирали, класифікували їх там по видів категорій, в яких інтересах там що було. І звідси я зробив дві метрики. Тобто, динамік ми побачимо порівняти, в кого було більше часто новин, які були... Тут під замовним мається на увазі від широкому сенсі.
We don't really mean the news that somebody paid for, but we mean the news that were serving somebody's particular interests, business or political preference. And the second graph shows the structure of these news stories. So whether they were talking about the owners, the political party, the preferable politician, business, or something else.
Ну, і бачимо, що трошки все-таки структура відрізняється від власних
видавців. The structure of the news stories differs from owner to owner. The idea is common, but the nuances are different. Next slide, please.
У нас є блок в дослідженні присвячений інструментам м'якого впливу,
такі як спорт, культура, релігія, instruments like sport, culture, and religion, which oligarchs were supporting as well. We were even joking while discussing with our team that this had to be the fifth criterion, because this is a criterion no one can get rid of. An oligarch can shut down their TV channel, can leave politics, but they will never shut down their sports club, except for Kolomoisky, of course. Well, sure.
Дуже це писав наш комунікаційний директор.
This is something that was written by our communications director, Vyacheslav Nozdrin. He is here with us.
За цей
And I'm really grateful for this contribution because I personally am not interested in sports at all. And so it was really interesting for me to read through all of these statistics and all of these stories. I was just calculating the money. I was just doing something I'm used to. I worked as a business journalist for a while, so I'm used to calculating other people's money. So I'd like to once again remind you that we had started this research prior to the war, prior to this stage of the war, prior to full-scale invasion, when most oligarchs had a firmer footing, when their affairs were relatively more or less okay, except for certain individuals who were at the center of criminal proceedings or were sanctioned by other countries, per se. But their assets were intact, at least, except for the ones that were occupied back in 2014. When we started working on this project, we understood that it would be important to take into consideration current events. And we are simultaneously participating in the Kiev School of Economics project Russia Will Pay, where we calculate Ukraine's losses from the war. And that is why I was able to bringing the numbers here, filtering by the oligarch-owned assets, because the overall statistics includes different assets owned by foreign investors and international companies. Here you can see the assets that belong to oligarchs. And it just so happens that the most significant losses were suffered by oligarchs who work within the industries that suffered the most significant losses. We're talking about the destroyed steel plants in Mariupol, like Azovstal. But since we are unable to physically access those assets, we draw our conclusions from the available pictures and videos. We draw the conclusion that they are destroyed. We will be able to make more detailed approximations after the occupation, but currently, for the purposes of calculating losses, we consider those assets completely destroyed. These numbers are the sum of three components according to financial statements: the value of main assets, the initial value of main assets, because we understand that it is possible to purchase a used vehicle, it is impossible to purchase used Azovstal steel plant because you would have to rebuild it. That's why we took into consideration only the initial value of those assets. Also the assets of unfinished investments and reserves, because in certain cases the reserves constituted significant amounts of money, so that's why we included them in these calculations. We can also see that within certain groups, the losses were quite significant. On the left, we calculated 5 main groups. In the prices per 2014, and you can see how many assets remain, how many assets were occupied or destroyed in 2014, how many assets were occupied or destroyed in 2022. The discussions about limiting the impact of oligarchs started in 2016. This is the first study that is this personal. Overall, we operate numbers, we operate macroeconomical statistics, which is usually faceless and personless. But this is the most personal study in the history of CES. Actually, no, we have already had research on oligarchs. But it wasn't this personal. So, discussions on this topic started a while ago. Back since 2016. But for the most part, these efforts were focused on the anti-monopolist policy, because this is one of the best practices on how to limit the impact of oligarchs. But for us, limiting the influence of certain individuals is not the goal itself. It would be important for us to make sure that the services and products provided by the companies owned by these individuals would be presented at a competitive price, because competitive price could differ depending on the field, but in general, to ensure equality for those businesses, for the state, for the small businesses, for the foreign investors, to ensure the equality on the market. Abusing monopolist position is one of the main tools of economic abuse, which is well recognized in the US, for example. The Anti-Monopoly Committee started being interested in oligarch businesses in 2016, when it started to issue decrees proclaiming certain subjects, certain businesses as monopolists, and also claiming that they abused their position in one way or another, and issuing fees, fining those businesses. The fines seemed significant according to Ukrainian realities, but those fines weren't really paid. We don't really have fine-paying discipline, because most of these cases were later submitted to courts and they're still in courts. It is related partially to the fact that maybe anti-monopolist committee does not have enforcement authorities, or maybe because the lawyers of these companies are just really good. Everybody understands that there was a violation in a certain case, but it isn't really being justified, and so these fines remain unpaid. Over the past couple of years, oligarchs has constituted 40% of all fines issued by the Anti-Monopolist Committee. It's approximately 300 million. Can you imagine? Against the backdrop of income of certain holdings, 300 million is not that much, but even these fines are not being paid. There's still a lot of work to be done in that regard. How many fines are actually paid? Do you have that information? How much money actually goes into the budget? By oligarchs or overall? I tried to calculate it myself. Right. How many fines were paid and entered the state budget? So 20% of fines are paid. 20%. And in case with oligarchs, the number is even less. None of the large fines were paid. 20%. And as far as I remember, those were one-off cases related to the tobacco producers and distributors.
Ні, звісно, так от ці 20% це загалом.
The minister will tell us later about how the money was returned to the producers. Oh, right, so then the 20% goes back to zero. So in fact, this instrument is not operational right now, but we believe that this is one of the very important tools, which is where we are supporting respective legislation which provides more authority to the committee, and we believe it has to be analogous to the National Bank, where it would be an independent institution hiring the best economists and best market analysts from largest banks in the world. And we believe that this is one of the great scenarios for the future to limit the monopolistic influence of oligarchs or other businesses. Back in 2016, the leadership of the committee evaluated the price of the monopolistic rent in Ukraine, and they said it's approximately 10% of the GDP. Can you imagine? These are huge numbers. Next slide, please, and this is my last slide. Coming back to the beginning of our conversation, the law on oligarchs. I'm not going to steal the job from the subject matter expert on the matter. We'll actually hear from them right now. But I would like to briefly remind you the backstory. This law was adopted a year ago. It came into effect in half a year, so in May. It was done on purpose to make sure that individuals were able to get rid of this status and not be limited by the legislation. It's like with the speeding tickets. The idea is not to avoid the ticket. The idea is to stop people from speeding. Which is why those individuals were given 6 months. Dima, would you comment a little bit more about this slide? Would you clarify? So the data is as of what date? This is our evaluation for any date. You can see the asterisk, and the asterisk means that they used to have the status because we know that certain individuals sold their media assets, some left political parties, but the asterisk means that they historically did this. because this is our evaluation. There might be some processes we're not aware of right now, but this includes historical data. If the person used to own a media, we say yes in this table, and the asterisk means that this is historical data. Or different changes in status. Maybe that happened previously, or maybe this is something that happens through a different oligarch that this individual was cooperating with.
Виконували би ці критерії раніше. Так от, повторюю.
Will the research represent monopoly with names? Yes, with the names. Once again, it's a very personal study, as I said, with specific names and less names. They did not use the 6 months provided. Maybe because they were waiting to sell their assets, because it doesn't really take that long. And then the war broke out. I believe that a lot of them felt like this wasn't the right time. And so the law came into effect. Nothing changed. Nothing changed at all. They started trying to do something in summer when the news broke out that the government was working on the registry of oligarchs. And then afterwards, a very significant event took place. When there were conscious acts taken by the state to actually enact the law, as it was one of the provisions for Ukraine's joining the EU, which left us without a choice. This is where I'll stop. And I believe it is a good time to give the floor to Mr. Minister to comment on the law a bit more. Right, so how about our recommendations? Will we share them later after the discussion, or maybe you would want to share the recommendations right now? I don't really have the slide for this, but we are supporting the legislation in a way that it is right now. The only thing we were surprised why it took so long to implement it, but I believe Mr. Minister will tell us a bit more about that. And also, the anti-monopolist agency has to be strong, it has to be independent, and it has to have all of the necessary authorities to argue in court and to have effective instruments of influence besides the fines, to have stricter sanctions. Because there was a decision on the chemical business owned by Firtash, and then it was later rejected by different courts. So it didn't come into effect. To be brief and to summarize our vision, I believe that we'll update the presentation. I really apologize for it being non-perfect. But as Dima said, we support the law as one of the de-oligarchization methods. And working on this research, we didn't really find what is called a silver bullet. Quite often, when a study is conducted, it is usually targeting a specific hypothesis, targeting a specific solution, that you have to do just this, and it will solve everything. And the oligarchs will vanish. We've been looking for the solution for a year, and we didn't find it. So in our recommendations that we included in our report, which I hope will be published tomorrow, and we will be spreading that information through all of our social media, through our Shows Economic Telegram channel, through our Facebook, through our website. The report actually includes more specific recommendations, but I think that during our discussion with Dennis, Metro will tell you a bit more about that. But there isn't really a single solution, which forces us to draw a conclusion that it will be a very long battle. We are not an office of simple solutions, we are an office of complex solutions. So I would like to give the floor to Dennis Maluska, the Minister of Justice, who is one of the key individuals in this process. I don't really know if we can call him the inspiration behind this project, but Denis was the person who has been speaking and working in this field for a very long time. Would it be correct to call you the manager of the de-oligarchization project in Ukrainian economy as of 2021-2022? No, not really. I'm just a consigliere lawyer. First question is quite obvious. Does the picture we presented match the picture that the ministry has, that the government has? What should we focus more on? First and foremost, thank you for your invitation. Thank you for letting me talk about a few things. Thank you for your research. It's very interesting. I can't really say that it drastically changed my understanding of the current situation. Instead, it just supported my assumptions. It's a great economic basis for the initiatives that we are implementing. I would like to start with a suggestion right away, since, as I understand, the presentation will be updated tomorrow. Maybe it is in here somewhere, but it wasn't presented. Something that I didn't see but wanted to see in this presentation. You have included I don't want to use the term oligarchs, I want to use the term richest people, because oligarch is a legal term. You have included what is the percentage of oligarchs in monopoly, but you didn't include how many oligarchs had their own parties, had their own politicians or ministers. Historically, I think it would be easy to do, but it would be a really good thing to look at as a historical trend, because within the context of definitions, it is very important, and within the context of contemporary realia, I would like to also remind you that currently oligarchs is an individual who fits 3 out of 4 criteria, that they have a generator, they have a Starlink, they have a water source, and a solid fuel boiler. So if you fit 3 of the 4 criteria, you're an oligarch, at least according to the given circumstances. This is one of the explanations, one of the arguments why the law on oligarchs wasn't radically implemented, and why we didn't really include the last names into the registry back in May. But this is one of the reasons. Even from these presentations, you can understand that war has limited the influence of oligarchs. The TV media is limited by the United Marathon. We also did not really have a slide about the ownership over politicians, so to say, but I think that this influence was also significantly decreasing. Because the fact that we are here commenting on last names, we are providing this presentation from a large platform, it is a testament to the oligarchization of politics. It is clear that one of the main tasks, one of the main focus has changed to preventive action, because preventive action was one of the key goals of the law. We didn't want to have the oligarchs suffer from all of the negative implications, but have them give them time to get rid of the status, and only then have them face the consequences. But there is also the second reason why the implementation of the law was postponed in a way. And those are definitely the recommendations of the European Commission, that the implementation of the law has to be based on the conclusion of the Venice Commission. We don't really have the conclusion yet. And the Venice Commission is taking a look at how we're regulating the situation in general, because I would like to remind you that the law on oligarchs is not the only instrument that the government has. We also have the de-oligarchization plan, where other steps that we are planning to take are described or have partially taken already. All of this has to be perceived systematically, not just the law separately. But of course, law on oligarchs is the most significant element, is the most interesting, the most original element. And I can honestly say that none of the other countries in the world had a law like this, and the European Commission has told us to implement this law. as a condition for future joining the EU, but they also provided this law as an example to Georgia. So we're not only a testing platform for new technologies, we're also a generator of exclusive ideas, which is not a bad thing in itself. But two factors that have limited the implementation of the law are the war and the natural temporary decrease of oligarchs' influence, right? And the second factor is the need to implement the law according to the recommendation of the Venice Commission. It would be quite unpleasant to create an oligarch registry and then learn that we have to redo everything, to exclude some people or to add people through a different procedure and then be faced with court claims. The law right now,
за формулюванням непопулярного зараз класика, це рушниця, яка висить на стіні.
A phrase of non-popular classical writer. It is a rifle that is hanging on the wall and will fire sooner or later. But it has fired because we could see certain oligarchs pretending that they are trying to get rid of their status. Some of them actually did get rid of certain elements. I think it has to be evaluated later, but there were certain changes to the preventive goal of the law was achieved because certain changes did take place. And so it is impossible to evaluate the impact of oligarchs right now in dynamics. Because even now, the Kremenchuk assets are not longer owned by an oligarch, they are owned by the state. The news from this front are coming in not weekly but monthly. So I believe that the dynamics of the situation with the damaged assets, with destroyed assets, and with oligarchs' influence over certain fields, that data will change. And the overall trend, as per my opinion, is towards the decrease of oligarchs' influence without any real capabilities to increase. Maybe it would be interesting to take a look at a graph analyzing the impact of the government, the influence of the government. I think it will be something that will actually be very similar to where the Russian warship was sent. So take a look at the role of the state and the role in the economy in particular. From the legal front or from the communications front even, for this law, when it was even back when it was a draft, the most interesting elements happened in a few phases. The law was attacked, it was targeted, there were many resources wasted. So the first wave of attack happened during the development of the draft law, when a lot of money was used to discredit the law through a few stages. First wave was actually statements that the law is funny, that it's unreal, that it will be impossible to implement, that it's a fake. When despite this criticism, the draft law was moving forward, it was clear that it would be absolutely illogical to block it and to stop its adoption. So at the very last stage of the law's approval at Verkhovna Rada, the essence of criticism changed, and now they were criticizing the law as being unconstitutional, that was striking the key human rights because oligarchs are also humans. There was also a very interesting approach to communication and criticism, which didn't really work. The law was adopted, and then we faced yet another wave of criticism, which was quite extensive. And it happened over a course of at least 6 months, where they tried to discredit the law in the international arena. And a lot of money was spent for that as well by certain individuals in order to show that this law is not what it seems, it is wrong, it goes against rule of law or best global practices, etc.
І надія на те, що цей закон нам міжнародна спільнота поламає, скаже, що це неправильно, біжить в іншому напрямку, от вона відбувалася рівно до того моменту, поки рекомендація не з'явилася.
This campaign was taking place until the EU recommended the adoption of this law and the implementation of this law as one of the conditions for Ukraine joining the EU. And so I believe it was clear that the discrediting campaign would not work. And then Akhmetov's media, I don't know how objective it is, but in the media it was presented that there were certain individuals who were trying to get rid of their assets. I believe there's something that has to be evaluated later on. Yet another technical detail. How do we define who is an oligarch and who isn't? The law provides clear criteria, but the procedure looks in a way where every initiator or every representative of the agency is listed in the law can say, we have evaluated this person as an oligarch, would you be able to evaluate them and maybe acknowledge them as an oligarch? The issue of how these last names will be included in the documents provided to the National Security Council, this mechanism was left out of the law on purpose. Why? Because, well, first of all, there isn't really a need to regulate that legally. And any description of a mechanism, any step-by-step description, would be faced by court claims. So the last legal steps the law describes, the higher are the chances for success of a specific procedure, a specific mechanism. The essence remained unchanged. How do we define whether Romanenko is an oligarch or not, and how do we plug this individual from amongst the rest of the Ukrainian population or non-Ukrainian population? That's actually an interesting aspect, because citizenship is not a criterion for an oligarch. And that's where I will be open and honest here. We had looked at the procedure after the law was adopted. How will the implementation take place step by step in order for different state bodies to be able to coordinate? And that's where we found out that there's just two steps. Not really steps, but two possible options on how to move forward. The first option is we take the list, the top 20 from Forbes, I don't know. And we check those 20 individuals against the criteria. And then we take the ones who are in the next 20. Or maybe the top 20 from a different study or a different magazine. This mechanism doesn't take long, but it's quite subjective, because at the end everything will end up with Forbes collecting money for not including oligarchs in their list. We wouldn't want that to happen. We wouldn't want to delegate that authority to Forbes.
Саме так, от формувати політику Форбсу тут не треба було б.
And so, if we were to do that, we would always face judgment. Why did we include Ivanenko in the list and didn't include Petrenko? That's politics. There's probably certain corruption here, because cherry picking is a way to show the societies that we're moving forward, but it is open to criticism for not being a systematic approach. Considering how many opponents we have to this law, there would be a lot of criticism. They would blame us for racket, for taking bribes, for personal interest, etc. Yet another approach, how can we do that algorithmically and correctly? Somebody who funded this project could probably look at this at the next stage, the correct algorithm to advise the government on how to evaluate oligarchs. I tried to do that.
I tried to develop methodology on how to move forward. It looks like an algorithm of a computer program, which is why it would take forever to explain. But the key takeaway would be to do this correctly and systemically. Would take at least a few months of work for a very large team of analysts. Приблизно, от на пальцях, як це зробити, критерії 4, відповідно, треба взяти хоча б список, хоча б приблизних хто відповідає одному критерію, потім порівняти, співставити його з другим критерієм, потім співставити його з третім критерієм, потім співставити з четвертим критерієм, але це на якомусь етапі це неможливо, тому що кількість можливих варіантів і врешті-решт, десь на столі якась вибірковість на етапі четвертого критерію, коротше кажучи, не хочу зараз
overload you with the details, but in reality, the number of possible options is insane. And we would have to process a large amount of information. Let's take a look at the simplest criterion, seemingly simplest. Participation in politics, right? So we have a list of politicians plus their relatives plus individuals related to a politician within business. So we have a list of the top politicians, and that includes the members of parliament, ministers, etc. Local politicians are not included in the list, so that makes things a little simpler. So we take this list, then we take the information on their family members from the official registers, which extends this list. Then we add their business partners, which extends the list even further.
Потім ми на це все вибираємо
And then we select a list of natural monopolies and compare it to that. There are approximately 4,000 natural monopolies. And we try to find out how many owners do these 4,000 monopolies have, and then this matrix is compared to the other metrics, and then there is another option based on their assets and their net worth. And we're not only talking about monetary assets, but we're talking about also the businesses that they are co-owner or beneficiary of. So they don't really have to satisfy all 4 criteria, they can satisfy 3 out of 4, and so the algorithm is overly complex.
А врешті-решт, тільки приблизний опис цього алгоритму, як потрібно рахувати так, щоб це не було вибірково, він мене зайняв сторінок 12 тексту.
To ensure that it's not selectionary, it took me 12 pages. So as soon as we have the implementation green-lighted, so as soon the Venice Commission makes a decision, or as soon as we
наприклад, олігархи почнуть
oligarchs
зловживати
abusing their position again,
по інтересам держави, теж
the law can be implemented even today. There has to be a balance with your integration requirements. So whenever we have this decision that we have to move forward with the implementation, we would need a certain period of time to provide a legally justified definition and to also have that definition match the actual real life realia. That's the story. Okay, colleagues. Thank you very much, Dennis. I would like to move up a level a little bit because everyone has their chair right now, and it forces us to look at the situation from a different perspective. Dima made a lot of calculations, and he displayed a very beautiful picture on the screens. Dennis has worked a lot on the possibilities of implementing the oligarchization according to the law. But from my viewpoint, I would like to take a step back and to talk about why did we started doing this? Why are we looking at oligarchs as issues? Because the law started off of certain vision, off of a logic.
Моє, наприклад, бачення, яке було в мене в голові на момент, коли, власне, деолігархізація...
I had a vision, even prior to the moment when the president raised the issue of oligarchization. My vision was that that the main instrument of oligarchs as of 2019, because that was the first time when it worked differently, was media, right? That controlling TV channels that have the engagement from half of the population and more than half of individuals who vote in an election, it actually enables oligarchs to impact the situation in the state through the investments into the media and to push through their certain legislations within the state policy, which later influence economic factors and which later helps oligarchs increase their own assets. So this is my vision. Maybe the government had a different vision. But I would ask Denis and then Dima. Unfortunately, Vadim Miski wasn't able to join us. He is a media expert, but we have certain understanding of media, like soccer as well. Also, we have Katarina here. She also has an understanding of the media, so she can argue with us as well. So, let's imagine we have won. Of course, all the oligarchs suffered certain damages, certain losses, but how will the picture look like after our victory from the viewpoint of capability of old oligarchs who we had studied to try to rebuild the system? We have this critical media with a critical massive impact onto electorate, and we invest in this specific media to impact elections. How can we prevent that if they rebuild that influence, or do you believe that this is over, this instrument will no longer work, and no one, neither amongst old oligarchs nor amongst new oligarchs, maybe new oligarchs will actually arise from the agrarian sector or whichever sector. So will people be able to rebuild the system of oligarch influence over media or not? This is a very complex question. There are many factors that actually influence this situation, and parameters of our victory would be the key factor. As soon as we understand the parameters of our victory, we would be able to build models and make calculations of practically anything for the future. But since these parameters are unclear, what will be the damages, for example, for our economy as a result of the war, the percentage of infrastructure damage, and even political parameters are not really clear right now. It's a very difficult question to answer. I cannot give you a clear prognosis of whether anyone will be able to restore their influence, or whether anyone will try to restore their influence, or whether we will finally have a competition of who can withdraw more funds from Ukraine. It is very difficult to give a prognosis. This rifle on the wall always has a trend to firing sooner or later. So the existence of the rifle on the wall always makes sense. So if we feel that this influence over media has been restored, we would have to move forward, because we had passed this stage when oligarchs led the state, when they split the assets, officially split assets. So if oligarchs are submitting official legal documents to the London High Court from their name on how they split assets during the privatization process, Укрпром scandal, I think that it doesn't get much worse than that. If you have stolen a lot of money, you don't really take that to court, but they did, and they brought it to court telling how they did it and who violated which commitments. This is so far from how it should be. And it is obvious that this shouldn't happen again. Of course, we have to understand that oligarchs aren't the only issue we will face after a victory. And it's not the most significant issue. We'll face a lot of other issues as well in different areas. And the importance of this issue will depend on what are the parameters of our victory. This is pretty much it. I know that this law will be important in the future. It has been already. And its existence significantly decreases the appetites of certain sharks for media, politics, and business to further continue their horrible practices. I have a couple of thoughts. First of all, the story with privatization cannot repeat itself again because there's nothing to privatize except for state-owned banks. Yeah, well, state banks, 5 state energy enterprises, and also the assets that are nationalized right now. Those are the assets that can be privatized. Okay, fine. There is still some risk, especially knowing that our businessmen have schemes according to which they can receive income from state enterprises, not being owners of these enterprises through traders, different brokering companies. We know these cases. They have been described in our report. Taking the legal state back, we're not journalists, we didn't carry out journalism investigations. We used open source data. Our report has more than 3,000 references to different resources. It's a sort of encyclopedia, a sort of aggregation of knowledge. Some people maybe have forgotten, some people maybe struggle to connect the dots. But all of these schemes on obtaining income from state-owned enterprises, all the schemes are also clear. So the more government nationalizes assets, the more will be individuals who want to profit from that. So we would want, of course, to have a strong anti-monopolistic system, but also a strong anti-corruption system. Maybe Dennis has his own thoughts on this. This is also an interesting issue to discuss. But this is one of the factors. And the second factor, we didn't invite them here. I don't think they would come here. But they're not sitting here, right? We can ask them, what do you guys want to do in the future? We did see certain indications when there were news that there were certain businessmen who wanted to invest in building certain production elements abroad. So maybe they will try to exit Ukrainian economy altogether and invest their income abroad. So that's, I guess, an okay scenario for Ukraine as well, for them to just not be presented here at all. Yet another question from me, and then we have here in the audience certain individuals who would like to ask questions. So taking a look at the situation from a different angle. I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit. You, Dennis, probably remember that when we discussed the oligarchization as such, one of the criticism points was that if we de-oligarchize, the economy will only have president, because Russia has also conducted de-oligarchization, but not through the law, through other available instruments of their government. And so we'll have only the president as a point of influence, and it will be even worse. That was one of the points of criticism. And so we're currently amidst the war.
Ми сподіваємося, президент вийде з
We
війни
really
сильним
hope
і
that our
переможцем.
president
Це в наших всіх
will
спільних
end up victorious
інтересі, але
and
з іншого
strong
боку,
at the end of the war. It's in all of our interest. But at
не
the same
призведе
time,
ситуація, коли от є
do you think
держава,
there
от
is
як
a
за
possibility
цією
where a
картинкою з першої літери адрес
in
російського корабля,
which
що
the government and the
може держава
politicians gain more
і, власне, ті
influence
політики, які є у владі, скористатися, і чи от ви є
where
людиною,
they
Діма, потім
use
теж я
this
тебе
as an
попрошу це
opportunity.
прокоментувати, як
I just want to
тобі
hear your
здається.
personal opinion
Тому що ми дивилися і на
because
вплив на політику,
as an
як це
independent
все
individual, and
виглядало.
Dima, I will
То ви
also ask you
людиною,
to
яка
comment on this because we
інтелектуально самостійна, очевидно,
looked at
теж про
how
це думала.
oligarchs influence politics, right? So you are an intellectual independent individual who probably thought about this as well.
Олігократія, по суті, олігархів.
Do you think this democracy from oligarchs,
яка не дозволяє рухатися
competition between oligarchs for political influence, do you think it positively impacts and prevents dictatorship? Because even with all of these oligarchs, we had faced the Russian invasion, right?
Тут кілька думок.
I have actually a few
Кілька тез.
thoughts
Перша
on
теза,
this.
закон про олігархів не є
There are a few theses. The first
рецептом до успіху,
is a law on oligarchs
достатнім рецептом для успіху.
is not a
Він
recipe
прибере
for success.
вплив олігархів, але це
It's
означає,
not a
що він
sufficient
зробить
recipe
автоматом
for
країну
success.
веселою, щасливою,
It will
радісною,
remove
прозорою,
oligarchs' influence,
чесною,
but it will
і яка
not make the
економічно
country
розвивається. Цього
happy,
недостатньо.
transparent, joyful,
Тому, якщо говорити про
and economically
атомне, чи
stable.
не
This is not
з'являться
enough, of course. So if we are talking
якісь
about whether
додаткові фактори, які чи додаткові гравці, які
any additional
заповнять той
factors
вакуум,
would
який буде
emerge, or any
утворений
additional
відходом
actors
олігархів, ну, є ризик,
that
але
would
для цього
fill
існують інші
this
інструменти, і
emptiness
це,
that will
напевно,
be left
теж
behind
тема для окремого
oligarchs.
дослідження,
There are certain risks,
що
but of
після
course we do
олігархів,
have instruments
які
to
механізми мають
mediate this.
спрацювати.
This is a topic for absolutely different study. What will happen after oligarchs?
Ще попередньо це закінчу, щоб кілька тез не забути.
Okay, I'm gonna just finish my previous thought.
Олігархи мали час.
To not forget what I wanted
Окей, це
to talk
класична
about.
історія для будь-якої країни.
Oligarchs had enough time.
Класична теза, не питайте мене, як
This is a
заробив свій
classical
перший
story
мільйон,
for
зате за
any
кожен цент
country.
свій наступний я готовий
It's a classical
надати звіт.
thesis. Don't ask me how I earned my first
У нас це
million,
не
but
трапилось.
then
Ну, тобто
I'm
немає
ready to
цього,
give
що
you
не
a
питайте
report
мене,
on
як я
every
заробив
next
гроші
million. We did not have this
протягом
take
першого
place.
строку Леоніда Даниловича Кучми, а далі я готовий за кожну копійку
Oligarchs
надати
don't
звіт.
tell
Цього
us,
не відбулося.
well,
Як
stop
воно
asking me
зайшло,
how I
так
earned my
воно
first
і
million
тривало
during
далі.
Kuchma's presidency, but then I'm ready to
Хоча,
report on
ну,
everything
от
else.
природнє-
No, because the people continued the
природній
practices
розвиток
that they started with.
олігархів, як це трапилося в Штатах, чи
But the natural development of
в Південній
oligarchs,
Кореї,
like that
наприклад,
happened in the
де
US or
великі фінансово-промислові
South
групи
Korea, for example,
стали цивілізованими, відійшли від політики,
where
перестали впливати вирішально
financial
на
industrial
політику.
moguls
І
became
зараз максимум,
civilized,
що у них
they
залишається,
moved
це
away from
статус
politics,
старих
they
грошей,
stopped
умовно.
influencing politics,
А цього не відбулося, хоча
and
був
the only
шанс.
thing they have
Було
left is the old
чимало
money
років
status.
зайти
This
в
did not
якісь,
happen in Ukraine, even though
цивілізовані
we did
рамки.
have a
Хтось це
chance.
більше намагався
There were a
зробити,
couple of
хтось взагалі
years
не намагався. Тут теж не
where
можна всі говорити
we
олігархи, вони всі
could
однакові, ні.
fit within the
Різні
civilized
тренди
criteria. Certain
Хтось
oligarchs
активно
attempted to do
намагався
that, certain did
все-таки
not.
стати,
They're not the same, of course, there were different trends.
Цивілізованою
Some
фінансово-промисловою
oligarchs
групою,
did actively
але
try to
не завжди,
become
і вже, якщо це
a
явище не
civilized
масове,
financial
вже винятків
industrial
навряд чи
group.
може бути.
But it wasn't constant, and if it is not an mass occurrence, these exceptions should not be taken into consideration. This is to answer the question whether an alternative would be better. Of course, oligarchs were stopping authoritarian approach to government. Of course, they weren't allowing any single individual to monopolize the governance in the state, right? So that was something that was preventing Ukraine from totalitarian government. But at the same time, this preventative mechanism prevented the economy from growing. So it brought us to a situation that is a lot more complex. This is a culture of corruption. And to quote the classical authors, the culture eats strategies for breakfast. But no matter how many strategies or plans or how many anti-corruption institutions we build, having this overwhelming corruption culture, it is very difficult to achieve a significant result. But this culture was built through oligarchs. It is so deeply embedded in us. Ask any individual walking on the street to list the number of synonyms to the word member of parliament, and I believe they won't have any positive synonyms for that word at all. And so anybody who wants to become a member of parliament, of course, they're expecting that they will not live off of their official salary of 30,000 hryvnia. So I believe there are a few cultural systematic phenomena that it would be very difficult to combat, and they will later on have certain negative impacts on economy instead of the oligarch influence. And so this fight against oligarchs is very complex. I used the analogy of how Americans entered Iraq. They brought order with them, but then Iran came and what was the point, right? So we have to have a plan. What will happen after oligarchs? To make sure that other forces don't make our life even worse. And besides describing things in the oligarchization plan, there are also a range of issues that are a lot more complex that we didn't mention. Like, no matter who creates a large company in Ukraine, a large financial industry group, they would be influential under the given condition, and they would automatically be an oligarch. Considering the culture that we are living in, it is impossible. So what does it mean? We shouldn't have large companies in Ukraine? Because all oligarchs say, I'm not an oligarch, I'm a significant employer, I pay salaries to this many thousand individuals, I feed this many thousand families, and I pay this many taxes. Why are you calling me an oligarch? This is a traditional discussion. A logical question. So we shouldn't have owners of large companies, large taxpayers? Well, the answer is that the focus has to be shifted onto the stock market. Each of us is a president, each of us is a stock owner, where a pension system would function, where people would have their personal capital. So we are talking here about the fact that the state where oligarchs have less impact would be a better state. And so there are a lot of steps we have to take. This is just the pretty picture that looks original, that looks different, that is not something people tried before, but all of the other methods are tried and tested. Look at the European history, US history, or even South Korean history. And these things have already happened. Right, this is something that I wanted to clarify. Dima, you have a little bit more time to think about it. So if we imagine a scenario where we had successfully finished oligarchization, where we had destroyed this mechanism of media influence, any large business owner who fits the criteria based on their net worth decides to support a certain cause after the war. For example, libertarianism. We have certain businessmen who make public claims that the state should interfere into the economy a lot less. And so that business owner spoke to a couple of friends and they found a political technology manager and they decided to create a political party and fund it. So according to the law on the national oligarchs, is there a possibility for these large business owners to create new political parties without them becoming oligarchs? So this is just a legal question, more than a complex philosophical question, like I asked before. This is a correct question. Yes, it is possible, but they have to have a very strong legal team. Every step has to be correctly evaluated, because this is risky business. When large business enters policy, lawyers have to carefully evaluate every step to avoid fitting this third criteria, either that will be monopoly or media influence. Because if they match more than 3 criteria, it would eventually hurt them. But we also have to have checks and balances mechanisms to ensure that the government doesn't abuse this mechanism as well, so the government does not use the oligarch status automatically against their potential political opponents. That's for sure. I can show you different graphs, but my favorite graph is where there was a significant decrease of the role of oligarchs, even despite the current circumstances. Maybe there will be new businesses that will be large businesses and that will want to participate in politics. It will be enough for them to not be monopolists, and in many specific industries it is very difficult. If we're talking about IT business, if an individual is an IT businessman, they fit the net worth size criteria, but they don't impact media and they're not a monopolist. Eventually, maybe the IT specialists will create their party in parliament, per se, right? I know some individuals who have these aspirations, or agrarian party, right? Remembering our analysis of the engagement of agrarian businessmen in football, this is also a significant risk of their participation in politics. Did I interrupt you? No, I've already expressed my idea. If the political representation of certain economy fields or small business will increase, maybe there will no longer exist thousands of small associations. Maybe they will increase and improve the quality and quantity of their representation in the civil society, and they will have political representation, even though there will be a small business party. That will be great, because they won't fit any sort of criteria except for the political participation. I forgot to tell you when I showed the slide about assets. Oligarchs are unable to work on competitive markets. They've attempted to do that, and they failed. Either they closed down those businesses or they sold those businesses later on. So the more competitive businesses we will have in our economy, the more this issue will decrease. But it will take a while, so we'll have to speed it up. I remembered an insight. When the concept was discussed, not even the draft law, but the concept on the anti-oligarch framework, within any developer's team, there has to be an individual who provides constructive criticism. This has been studied multiple occasions, but our internal criticism was, do you guys understand when you discuss this, that our television will be very boring if we remove this influence? It is interesting because a lot of oligarchs are funding, they're subsidizing television because it is a political weapon. If the television ceases to be a political weapon, it will stop being subsidized, and it will be so incredibly boring. There won't be the Swan Lake, it's usually broadcasted on other occasions, but it will be really boring. People will not be satisfied with the TV product. Well, we all agree with this. Sure, we understand that this is probably what will happen, because a country cannot have incredible television product if the country is relatively poor, right? So a poor country cannot have star football teams. where the team owner buys all of the best players on the market. Economically, it is very difficult to justify. I was always overjoyed when we looked at oligarch Kurchenko. How was he an oligarch without a football team, right? So they tried to do anything possible to give him a football team because he wasn't a real oligarch without a football team, was he? So the fact that he took that football team back then, it was clear that it was a corruption pyramid with all of the relative consequences. But why did they have to give him this football team to draw the picture of an oligarch? Nobody can explain. But that took place, that happened. So if we finalize the de-oligarchization process, the football industry will not be funded well either. The television industry will not be funded well. And there won't be this beautiful, bright politics reflected somewhere. There won't be this pretty political parties largely represented in every single city with beautiful flags, with organized purchase protests that are filmed by multiple media. If this happens, then we failed in a way. So that means we didn't implement our law. Politics has to be boring and interesting for the most people. Every politician has to be boring individuals, so the competition amongst the three most boring individuals has to be to find the most balanced and adequate individual. But there shouldn't be this top political star filmed by every TV channel with him playing football, helping people, doing charity, purchasing apples, collecting mushrooms. That is wrong. This should not happen. In the West, this process is very different. It should be a different culture. It should be boring, but more professional, more civilized. There should be less shit hitting the fan. If you take a look at Republicans and Democrats discussing on TV, this is very different from Ukrainian political discussions. So everything will be more boring. If we see that everything is boring and we are like Switzerland, we have done everything right. But if everything is very interesting and the grandmas sitting on the benches outside their homes discuss politics, instead of discussing their local issues, that means we're moving in the wrong direction. And we have to correct our approach. Thank you so much. Sasha, Katya, the floor is yours.
Взагалі дослідження, дуже цікаві результати, дуже хочу почитати. Я згодна хочу з останнім просто погодитися з тим, що якщо будуть реформи далі йти на те, щоб забезпечити конкуренцію, будуть скасовані ці всі пільги, які насправді є. І ми можемо згадати пільги, які були на початку 2000-х, і електроенергія, і залізниця, і все інше, вони платили набагато менше, і з цього отримували свою ренту. Тобто це буде допомагати також.
The subsidies for electricity, for railway transportation that had existed since 2000 that will also help changes. I thank Dennis for his statement because he provided so many details proving that the processes are taking place, because on the outside you can't really see what is happening. It is a little bit sad when you talked about football. I really hope that football will still exist. It will just fund it through different channels. But I have a question to what Dennis said in regards to checks and balances. How do we control and make sure that the state does not abuse the oligarch status? Maybe you have some ideas, maybe Dmytro has some ideas.
Не відбулось. Не відбулось об'єктивно, вже пройшло.
Well, we were told right away that the decisions will be politically motivated, right? But that didn't happen. Objectively, there has been a long time since the law has been adopted, and it didn't happen. And the stream of the law implementation is under control of the European Commission.
Це набагато цінніше, ніж там зводити рахунки через інструмент роботи олігархів. Якщо зовсім відверто, інструментів
becoming an EU member is a lot more valuable for us than to have our revenge through these oligarch instruments. To be quite honest, I believe there are quite enough instruments to impact certain oligarchs, considering that their influence has decreased. And so I don't think it's worth destroying our image, our reputation, using this law, and losing our euro integration opportunities. I don't really see this as a reality. It's very unlikely. Civil society, of course, has to have certain oversight. There's a certain oversight from the international community.
Ми стали об'єктом уваги всього світу глобально. Там найменші наші політичні рухи відображаються і коментуються на усіх провідних медіа світу.
And it is due to the war that we are currently the focus of attention of the entire world, and all of our political changes are reflected and commented across all of the global media.
Мені здається, зараз нереалістично. Тому десь так.
If we try to violate the rules of the game, it will be noticed, and it is unrealistic now. I would like to support this by saying that the external control will probably save the day here. Because remember how many conditions of IMF we had to fulfill for a couple $1 million, which seem insane because we receive a couple of million every month, a lot more than a couple of million. But after the victory, will require billions of dollars to restore our economy, which I believe we hope to receive from our external partners in the form of credits or in the form of arrested Russian assets. But those assets will be arrested by other countries. We will not receive them directly because Russian assets in Ukraine are insufficient to cover our losses. So there will be immense foreign control over those funds, and I believe that oligarchs will attempt to gain some control, but there will definitely be more significant foreign control. Right. You told me about media, so my first question will be about media. But prior to that, I'll tell you a short story, a short anecdote. So when in 2008, Viktor Pinchuk purchased a publishing house, Economica, he was often asked, why did you do that? That was a very expensive deal. And he used to say that I would like to pick up a newspaper in the morning and see myself on the front page. That's a real story. When in 2014 Viktor Pinchuk sold this publishing house for a symbolic amount of money. I think it's a well-known fact. It was sort of a buyout. He said something along the lines of, it would be a lot cheaper for me to buy this front page 4 times a year. So related to this is my question. If I heard you correctly, the main instrument of influence for oligarchs is media. So the main tool that oligarchs use to influence the society is media.
Медіа за просування тих чи інших ідей. І як з юридичної точки зору цьому можна було б запобігти? Бо ми, в принципі, бачимо ці країни, які владнали це питання досить жорсткими, в принципі, обмеженнями, досить жорстким законом про медіа.
Because we clearly see a number of countries that have regulated this issue through quite strict limitations, quite strict legal media laws. Can we do something like that in Ukraine? And another question. It's to both Dennis and Dima.
Не знаю, топ-3 там якісь ключові регуляторні граблі, на які тепер ми не маємо наступити, щоб не дати можливість зростати новій генерації олігархів або ринку Тобто, що ми законодавчо категорично не маємо зробити,
fall for now to ensure that we do not raise yet another generation of oligarchs, or we do not let the former generation of oligarchs to power. What can we do? from a legislative point of view. Thank you.
Дійсно,
I
не обов'язково
will
бути
moderate
власником, можна і
the
так купувати
discussion,
замовні
so the first question
матеріали.
will
Інша
probably be
справа,
to
що
Dennis in the
якщо
second
ти
demo.
власник каналу, ти можеш не брати ні в кого гроші і диктувати умови. Ну, тобто це, по суті, як...
Right. You don't have to own
можна,
media,
власне,
you can
мати
just
трубу туди нікого не пускати, можна підпорядковуватись
But
європейським
if you're an
правилам і
owner of a TV
встановити
channel, you
окремо
don't really take
бізнес,
anyone's money
тримати
and you
трубу,
can
окремо
just create
постачати
your own
газ і
material,
до
right?
труби, щоб мали однаковий доступ
So
усі
that's
абсолютно
also
постачальники газу. Тобто
the fight against monopoly
можливість
principles are the
кожного
same.
заплатити
You can
хабар
either own
медіа
a
і
pipe and not
поставити
let
свою публікацію, це
anybody use
демократичніше,
it,
ніж
or
усі
you
публікації від
can
однієї особи.
follow European rules
Я розумію, що
and
це
provide equal access to that
не та
pipe
країна,
to
яку ми
all of
заслужили.
the producers.
А
The
другий етап,
ability of
власне,
anyone to
безумовно,
pay
це
a bribe
сильний
to
регулятор,
media
це конкурентні
would be more
медіа,
democratic
це
than have all publications from a single viewpoint. I know that it's not the country we deserve, but it is the country we have. And the second stage would definitely be a strong regulatory mechanism, competitive media.
Знову ж таки, все попереду, і я, власне, не Мінкульт, який веде цю тему.
Correct regulation,
точно
new
скажу,
media legislation,
якщо є
which is something that
телеканал,
is
який
within the
вкладається сотні
democratization plan.
мільйонів
I'm not sure if we'll
гривень без
succeed. It is still
будь-якого
ahead of us.
сподівання
I do not
чи
represent the
плану
Ministry of
отримати
Culture
прибуток,
that is
то
responsible for
конкурувати
this.
з таким медіа,
But I can
іншому
definitely
медіа,
tell
яке
you
не
that
має на
if we have a
меті
TV channel that is being
лобіювати
funded
інтерес олігарха, ну, практично неможливо. Ні за
without
якістю продукту, ні за технічним
any
оснащенням. Ну,
or
тобто,
plans to
шансів
receive
близько до нуля.
income,
Охоплення аудиторії буде абсолютно іншим. Все
it
буде
would be
інше.
very
Відповідно,
difficult
ми не давали шансів
for a media that is not lobbying
гарним медіа
somebody's
розвиватись,
interest
в
and
принципі,
oligarch's interest
апріорі.
to
Ми це
compete with that
змінили. Ну, або
TV
змінимо,
channel,
або
with that
змінюємо.
media outlet.
А,
The popularity would be
наразимось на іншу
different, the
небезпеку,
viewership would be
наразимось,
different.
так.
So that means
Можна
that we
буде
had
за
created
невеликий
an
бюджет
environment
скуповувати ряд медіа,
for
але так
competitive
само
media to
опоненти зможуть
develop at all.
скуповувати ряд медіа. От
We are trying to
доброго
change
ранку,
that.
ми
We
приїхали
are
в
changing that
дикий
right
захід.
now. We will change that eventually.
А,
But if we'll face any other threat,
конкуренція
sure.
не є фінальною точкою, куди ми маємо добігти. Ми маємо добігти до
There will be different
цивілізованого
competitors
ринку
being
з
able to
допомогою
purchase
і
media,
державою, і з
but that will be the wild, wild
правильними
west
і
of our
незалежними
competition.
мовниками, які
Competition
фінансуються в
is
тому числі
already
за
a good
державний
thing.
бюджет в певній сфері.
It is definitely not the final
Але, це
stage.
питання, як бігти далі, знову ж
Our
таки посади.
final endpoint is a civilized
Там,
market
де
with
скільки
certain
коштів
state
вкладено,
regulation,
які медіа є
but with
збитковими,
also
які є прибутковими, я
independent
не
media
впевнений,
outlets
наскільки там
funded by the
оцінений
government, maybe.
ще
But this
неофіційна
is
частина грошового
the question
потоку,
for the
як
future.
дохідна, так і витратна.
And if you
Мені
look
здається,
back at
що
the
там
slide,
було б скориговано, тому що всім
where we
зрозуміло,
could
що
see
матеріали
how
замовні
many
часто,
media are unprofitable, how many
м'яко
are
кажучи, не
profitable.
фінансувалися
I'm not
офіційними
really sure
платежами.
whether that
І
slide
так
also
само
provides a
витратна
clear
частина
evaluation to the
різноманітні доплати,
unofficial money flow.
за різноманітні послуги
I
чи
think
зарплати так само
it would look
була
different,
і
the statistics would look
конвертна.
different because
Складно
we
зрозуміти з
understand that a
офіційної
lot of
статистики, як воно, як воно в
articles that
реальності
were
виглядає
ordered by separate
медійний бізнес
individuals
часто
weren't
не
often
зовсім так
officially
професійно
paid
на
for.
папері, але, ну, от десь так.
And so
Знову ж таки,
different
в нас
other
не буде ідеалу
expenditures
одразу.
weren't also legally registered as well, so it's very difficult to understand from the official statistics what the real situation
Повністю
looks
історія
like.
не може повторитись, тому що зараз
What the
сильно
real media
прозоріше взагалі
business looks like.
суспільство. Відкриті дані, реєстри, фінансові звіти, ми це все бачимо. Є
We won't
watchdog,
really reach
громадські
the ideal
організації, профільні
situation
медіа, які це
right
все
away.
виловлюють на
In terms
взльоті.
of
Коли хтось,
regulation,
якась раптом невідома людина от, виграє тендери на якісь мільярди гривень, ми це все
I
бачимо.
believe that the story will not
бо
repeat
колись ми
itself
це вже
again because
перше
the
знали
society is a lot
взагалі,
more
що от
transparent. We have
величезними
many
активами володіють
open
окремі люди.
sources, we have many
В момент,
watchdog
коли вже цей
organizations,
процес
we
був
have
запущений.
a lot of
зараз
organizations
це все
catch
видно на
this right away.
взльоті,
So when an
переважно.
unknown
Зараз,
individual
тому, до
wins
речі,
a
я
million
сподіваюся,
hryvnia
і це
tender, we see
поважання
that.
до Дениса те, що, власне, тимчасово
Because
різні
when we learned about the existence of oligarchs for the very first time, we learned that post factum.
відкриті знов потім.
But now we are seeing that from the onset for the most part.
Деякі датасети вже були відкриті.
Which is why I really hope
ну, тобто, щоб не
that
було, ну, щоб це дійсно було тимчасово, чи саме через війну, щоб потім
open
всі ці
source
дані
data
знову
that
були,
used
ми
to be
могли
open source and
користуватися і
currently
бачити от все,
is restricted for the martial law. I hope that data will be open source again. The process has started. I believe some data sets were reopened, but I really hope that this restriction would be temporary for us to be able to use this data later on to see and react for the state and for the civil society.
Якщо вірити медіа, що на якомусь етапі один з олігархів зрозумів, що навіщо проводити свої фракції в парламент, тому що це мега дорого, якщо вони як тільки потрапляють в парламент, стають невдячними, і їм треба платити стільки само, скільки чужим депутатам за прийняття рішення голосування. Який сенс витрачатись на вході, якщо можна потім за цю саму ціну купувати вже тих, хто пройшов самостійно або за бюджет іншого олігарха, і в цьому економіці. Тобто правильний підхід, з цим треба боротися, напевно, велика роль гратимуть антикорупційні
as soon as they end up in the parliament, they become ungrateful, so they can just pay other parliament members who are already parliament members to purchase decisions and to purchase their lobbying. And it helps them save money. That's an interesting approach, something we have to fight with. I believe that anti-corruption agencies will play a significant role both in politics and in media.
Намагаються, да, і це активно комунікується, але мені здається, що в приватному секторі рівень хабарництва не менше, ніж в державному, а той, хто намагався потрапити на полиці супермаркетів, зубників чи іншим чином стати постачальником чи акредитованим постачальником послуг при якійсь установі, наприклад, банку. Всі розуміють, що в приватному секторі теж є корупція, вона, м'яко кажучи, теж не маленька, і там якось немає практики.
So people, the producers who had attempted to launch their products on supermarkets or to provide services to banks, they understand that the private sector is also very corrupt. And they don't really have an anti-corruption practices. It is a crime. No, it is a crime. It impacts the economy no less than the corruption in the state sector. Because the producer that wins is not the producer who has a better product, but the producer who has paid a bribe to someone.
Єдине таке на прощання, крім того, що дякуємо Денису, у нас такий формат змінився з панельної дискусії в нетривіальний такий камерний формат презентації і потім, по суті, бесіду з міністром. І я думаю, що ми дуже багато всього цікавого почули, все записувалося, ми все це будемо викладати, можна буде передивитися і порадити тим, хто сьогодні не зміг приєднатися через проблеми з інтернетом. У мене одне велике прохання зараз всім його кажу з полісімейкерів. Ні.
And then just the discussion with the minister. But I think we learned a lot of interesting things from both of you. It has all been recorded. We will publish all of this. You'll be able to look through this. And I give advice to the people who weren't able to join to take a look at this later on. And this is an advice I have to all the policymakers. To make sure that after our victory, when everybody will be celebrating the victory, to adopt the legislation on the increased pay to everybody on political positions, to use this moment to enact this legislation. It seems minuscule, but it creates this first push for a lot of members of the parliament, government representatives,
Міністр не проти.
To avoid corruption.
Ні, Боже збав, я не... Моя дружина...
If we want to create an appropriate system, it has to be honest all around. And if we as citizens want to have high-quality politics without oligarch influence, we have to pay a lot of money, to pay justified amounts of money for this politics. I don't think the minister minds.
Це теж не silver bullet.
God forbid, I don't mind, of course.
Платити, тому що, безумовно, якщо ми не платимо, тоді ми, власне, взагалі робимо неможливим будь-які далі кроки вибудовування системи.
The first thing, I completely agree. This is something that has to be done, but it didn't work with judges.
Треба, власне,
This is not a silver bullet either.
Тому що, ми тобі дали можливість,
we have to pay justified amounts of money, because if we're not paying and somebody else is paying, then we make it impossible for any further steps to change the system.
Про зарплати приймали відібрати від органів влади, просто середньо кажуть, дуже складно будь-кого,
to punish individuals who violate the rules. So we give you the opportunity, if you don't value that opportunity, you leave. Then this will work.
Можливості медійні, тому що вдарити, що от вони зараз підняли собі зарплату, це гарно. Якби це приймали умовні жителі Марсу, в Кабміну будуть отакі зарплати, ми такі, нічого діяти не можемо. Ми Праді за 30 гривень на місяць попрацювати, але спустили, воно прийнятніше. Який такий механізм придумати, не знаю. От ЄС хай регулює. От, до речі, євроінтеграція.
Always produces certain backlash, and then the oligarchs use their manipulation methods.
Я чому кажу про перемогу, тому що дійсно можна було зробити це одноразове рішення, а потім вже
to display stories, look at these government representatives increasing their salaries. If this was a decision made by, let's say, Mars dwellers, and then we would be, yeah, well, the Mars dwellers increased our salaries. We could accept a 30 hryvnia salary, but it would be okay for EU to regulate government salaries. Why am I talking about decisions after the victory? Because it would be okay to adopt this solution as a one-time solution, and then we would advise certain inflation formula. In a month during the election campaign, someone will adopt a decision about the radical decrease in the government pay. This will be a different discussion. Thank you all so much for being here today. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for participation. Thank you, Dennis, for having this interesting conversation. And thank you, Dima, for working on this, and who will update the presentation today so that we can publish it tomorrow with the report. Thank you so much.